Welcome to a long video on European history. But wait, don't close it, watch it. Why? Because we are at the most important video in the series within world history. I will explain from scratch how all of Europe was shaped during the Middle Ages. Of course, there are the modern age and the contemporary age, and even the space age, but the most important periods in world history, during which the Habsburg dynasty, etc., do not exist. They will be covered in a later video. But how did Germany, France, and Italy emerge? How did these countries shape Europe? It's a long video, but if you want to be able to talk about European history in a social setting, or at least have some knowledge about it, then you should watch it. By the way, the Germans also came from here. This is what the German cloak is like. The French have also come out like this. If you want to, let's watch this video. Now, I will briefly explain Europe first. There are two important points in Europe. One is the Seine, and the other is the Rhine. These two rivers are two important key points that allowed the Vikings to enter Europe. We know this. These two rivers are significant. I will tell you about the Arctic Ocean to the north. It is very important. England, Denmark, and so on, all of those places define the boundaries of that sea. The Mediterranean Sea was, at one time, an invaluable asset for the Ottoman Empire. And of course, it was also an invaluable asset for the Venetians and Italians in general. We will connect the Mediterranean Sea with a Suez Canal or something like that in the future, but anyway, the Mediterranean Sea is important for trade. And at the same time, there is Europe itself. Even though Europe may be a union now, it has never been able to become an America at any point in time. The reason is that Europe is not a continent on its own. Its name is indeed the European continent, but it has a connection to Asia. This is actually an extension of Asia. The Mongols are already making very good use of this extension. The Mongol invasions coming from Asia were primarily responsible for shaping all of Europe. And below, there is a border, a touch to Africa, the Strait of Gibraltar. Why Gibraltar? I will tell the story of the founding of Spain by Tariq ibn Ziyad. You will see it there as well. We will create these with memories that will write themselves in your mind. There are critical islands surrounding what we call Europe. The British Isles are present. There is Malta, there is Sicily, there is Corsica. Even Cyprus is considered an island of Europe. There is Sardinia. All these islands have greatly influenced the shaping of Europe's trade. Now, if we start with European history, let's set geography aside. Europe begins with the ancient cultures of Rome and Greece. So, its foundation is the ancient Roman and Greek small tribes. We cannot say these are great countries or empires at first. Later, they unite. The Roman Empire emerges, and the Roman Empire grows even larger. Enormous borders are reached, then they are divided in two. The West goes on and so on. But fundamentally, there are very small tribes, and everything starts with the Germans. The term Germans refers to what you see on the screen, which encompasses Germany, Austria, Bohemia, and the western part of Poland. For we will largely discuss the Germans. Here between 900 BC, the English, Germans, and many French actually trace their roots back to the Germans. Later, if the Angles are present, the Saxons will emerge, and they will go on to form the Angles and Saxons. However, the Germanic tribes have a significant problem. They cannot advance eastward due to constant pressures from that direction. Therefore, they are forced to start moving westward. Of course, the Huns are also involved in the situation. In the year 350 AD, the Huns want to escape from China. China is pressuring them. The Huns come and push the Germanic people living along the Volga and Don rivers westward, initiating a kind of migration of tribes. They also advance westward, moving deeper into Europe. There is another event. Slavs live in the plains north of the Black Sea, but they are being pressured by the Goths. The Goths are also entering their lands. When we say Goths, let it sit comfortably in your mind. Later in history, they will split into two groups known as the Visigoths and Ostrogoths. But the Goths are part of these Germanic tribes. They are in Scandinavia around the 2nd century. From there, they move down towards Byzantium in the 3rd and 4th centuries, plundering the places they go. And now imagine that the Huns are coming, the Goths are squeezing you, the Slavs are already caught in the middle. That's how it is. A migration towards the west is beginning. Here, we will look at this. There is something called the European Hunnic Empire. As it rises and advances into Europe, we refer to today's England, the Netherlands, Germany, and the Dutch collectively as Germans. They start to gradually form and settle in these areas little by little. So, is there really no one who settled properly in Europe? In fact, there are Greek cities that have used democracy to some extent. These are cities, but they are not as large as present-day Athens. Think of them more like small villages or towns, but the organization is nice. There is Athens, and then there are the famous Spartans, small cities. These cities are very successful in trade along the coast. So yes, they sometimes fight among themselves, but at least there is a Greek community. They can unite when there is a threat from the outside world, but they conflict internally. There is a city in Italy. We will see this later. Italy will grow significantly. At that time, Italy is very small. They are learning something only from the Greeks. While the Greeks are selling them wine and so on, the Italians are also teaching them about the cultures coming from Asia. The Italians later learn something from the Greeks and escape from ignorance. The whole situation changes with the Romans. Now Rome is growing so much that over time we mentioned Italians and so on, but the Roman Empire is expanding to the point that it eventually swallows Greece as well. In fact, it's not just swallowing Greece, they are almost consuming all of Europe. The Romans settle in the north as far as the Rhine and Danube rivers. They move into Africa, enter Anatolia, and take Ireland and Scotland. They cannot completely take England. They reach a point in England where they are tired of the attacks coming from the north. They can no longer advance. In fact, the similarities with Game of Thrones begin here. Later, you will see that we will also remember Game of Thrones in the section about the 7 kingdoms of England. But here, we have the name of a commander known as Hadrian. There is a wall built by an emperor known as Hadrian's Wall. This wall was constructed to prevent attacks from the north. Even today, remnants of it exist. The wall in Game of Thrones is actually inspired by this. The goal is to get rid of the northern tribes of ancient Scotland. There are so many attacks that they eventually flee. They never even enter the African deserts. They don't bother at all. Over time, colonial relations are established with the tribes there, but Anatolia and Mesopotamia are a paradise that is unattainable for them. Now look, I had previously mentioned that Game of Thrones resembles the history of England, but what is actually done is this. If you look at the map here, it places Ireland on top of England in the British Isles. So, it results in the map being flipped upside down. Bring the map of Westeros and Ireland down and flip it upside down. Here is where the Hadrian Wall is, and to the north is where the wall is located. So the map is that similar, and the story intertwines that much. So actually, these divided houses, like the house of whatever, come from here. This is actually the distribution of Westeros. It's like a kind of equal distribution of Europe. At least now you know that the history of Europe has a lot to do with the history of England in relation to the events of Game of Thrones. Religion has greatly shaped Europe. When we look at the Rome of that era, both the Greeks and the Romans believed in polytheistic religions. Christianity is gradually taking shape in Anatolia after Judaism. They are fleeing because it experiences a lot of violence at first, and then it settles within Europe. As you will see throughout this video, while Christianity evolves into Catholicism, Protestantism will later emerge. In polytheistic religions, the situation is much simpler. As long as you don't anger God and offer sacrifices to Him, there is no problem. However, there are many sins in monotheistic religions. The sin of theft, the sin of rape, and various other things are considered sinful. In polytheistic religions, there is nothing like this. In fact, if you go back to Roman history and do a little research, you will see that quite perverse things were happening. When the college was wandering around Italy, both Christianity and Judaism had a chance, especially during that period, for Christianity. Yes, they are under pressure, but they can shape themselves because they are far from the center of Rome. At one point, it is even said that they come to Jesus and say, "Why should we pay taxes to Caesar in the Roman Empire when our God is in heaven?" Jesus also asks if there is any money. Of course, it is a coin made of iron from that period. It has Caesar's image on it. He says, whose picture is on it? It's Caesar's. To Caesar, what is Caesar's? This saying comes from there. Render unto God the things that are God's, and unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Jesus does not say to rebel against paying taxes. He says to give what is due. When Jesus died, Christianity split into two paths. Geneticists say that there are those who claim, yes, we belong to Christianity, but the Old Testament binds us, so we can also be considered Jewish. There are also the innovators. These innovators say that Jesus Christ has freed us and a new religion has emerged. Here, the fate of Christianity is determined by St. Paul. In fact, yes, Jesus is the prophet of the Christians, but St. Paul is the one who facilitated the spread of the religion. Because within 50 years after the death of Jesus Christ in AD 30, St. Paul moved to Anatolia and then to southern Europe in the 50s. In fact, it was St. Paul who ensured that Christianity did not remain outside of Europe or Anatolia, and who spread it throughout Europe. Now it's time for the Germans. That's enough about language. Now, when you are America, your job is easy. Why? Your continent is protected by the sea and the ocean. There is no one who will suddenly attack from Monday to Tuesday. Once you secure the north and the border with Mexico, the job is done. But if you think about the greatness of the Roman Empire, attacks are coming from everywhere because you are on every continent and there are direct attacks from all sides. There is no need to cross oceans or board ships at all. The very thing that ultimately brought down the Roman Empire was the attacks by the Germans. Although the Roman Empire initially did not take the Germans seriously, over time, these Germans gradually weakened the Roman Empire. In the end, they were the cause of its collapse. In fact, the Germans living in the north destroyed the western part of the empire. In 476, within a span of 75 to 76 years from 400 AD. The Western Roman Empire emerges in 395 AD. Theodosius looks at the Roman Empire and sees that the empire is very large. Such a large empire cannot be managed from a single center. It divides into west and east. The western part doesn't even last 100 years. Now, the situation is different in the Eastern Roman Empire. Some historians say that the term Byzantium was used later for the Eastern Roman Empire, while others argue that Byzantium referred to itself as Byzantium. There are various opinions on both. Byzantium, meaning Eastern Rome. I am using the term Byzantium from today's perspective. But still, know that when I say Istanbul, I do not mean Constantinople. Istanbul, but it was then called Constantinople. Byzantium, I mean the Eastern Roman Empire. As you know, the Eastern Roman Empire lasted until the conquest of Istanbul in 1453. Therefore, there are two falls of Rome, the first in 476 due to the Germans, and the second 100 years later in 1453 due to the Ottoman Empire. The way the Germans distributed this allowed for the emergence of Italy, Germany, and France from Rome. So the Franks, Germans, and Italians are emerging until AD 300. A significant struggle against Christianity is actually taking place until 313. The Emperor of Rome doesn't want this, but then things take a turn for the worse. Let me explain. The Emperor of Rome, Emperor Constantine, converts to Christianity. When he converts to Christianity, the religion of the empire also shifts to Christianity. Worse yet, chief bishops, whom we would call the Pope in Rome, are emerging. They are becoming very powerful. They begin to make decisions alongside the emperor. The Pope later acquires a small army. The situation is escalating. The Pope gets involved in the minting of money. The Pope's powers are increasing. And thus, for a long year, all of Europe will be troubled. Finally, England's King Henry will say, "I do not recognize Pope Mopa." And that is when Protestantism will emerge. The Pope, who completely governs Europe, comes into the picture. Religion will eventually take precedence over the state and the empire. Was it really a good thing that the Germans destroyed Western Rome? In fact, it wasn't very good at all, because the Germans were not a stable, multicultural society like Rome. Most of them couldn't even read or write because they didn't know how. The trade system collapsed. Accounts were kept by writing on cloth or stone and on papyrus, which was before the invention of paper, but they were at least keeping some sort of account one way or another. However, the Germans did not have such a trade account. He is taken aback at first. Since they did not have a central government, kingdoms began to emerge in every region, village, and town in Europe. One says, "I am the king," another says, "I am the king." One claims to be a clan, another claims to be a tribe. They are gradually splitting apart. Europe is falling apart. It's just like when you hit a glass with a tap and it completely cracks and shatters. Warlike behavior is decreasing because, as they attempt to conquer, there is no longer a Roman Empire to fight against, leading them to settle into a more sedentary lifestyle. Strong warrior commanders are also transforming into nobles. The kings and queens of today, including Queen Elizabeth, are ultimately descendants of these warriors. When you look at it, Europe actually emerges from the domestication of warriors. So what happens when it is divided? The lands fall into the hands of families. The families then begin to further enslave the peasants who used to live within the empire. Who benefits the most from their division into small different places? The merchants especially the Venetians and their merchants. Why? There is no longer a Roman emperor trying to keep prices equal across all his lands, and they can buy at the price they want and sell it elsewhere. Most tribes, clans, and kingdoms don't even communicate with each other. So, what happens to the truly strong German warriors? The remaining ones? The non-nobles? They become knights. The Pope is very clever. He says, "You are the noble soldiers of Christianity. You must carry the cross of Jesus upon you." The story of the red cross on that white garment comes from there. That is why they carry such a large cross. In fact, it is said that before Tariq ibn Ziyad and others even emerged, there was the Anatolian Seljuk state. It even says that you should fight against Islam. Don't fight among yourselves. Let me unleash you upon Islam. I will soon explain how many crusades will be organized. The place where Western Rome faced its greatest problems is Britain. They are fighting the Celts. The Celts are the ones who paint their bodies blue, wild warriors. They even have a movie about them. You can watch it. They eventually drive the Roman Empire out of Britain. The Celts are very powerful. However, they do not have a single king, because there is no king. They are divided into tribes and clans. Now we have come to the point where the whistle blows, the place that will change the history of England and Europe. Now, these Celts have thrown the Romans off the island, the British Isles. In the middle there is a kingdom called Vortigern. This empire is with the king. He sees that the other tribes, the tribes in Britain, are attacking very aggressively. He is asking for help from across the sea, from the European continent, from the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. These are Germanic warriors. These German wars, oh my goodness, I say I will go and fight anyway. I will see England. I will see Britain, I apologize. They land on the island, and as soon as they arrive, they both help win the war and settle there. They find the island quite beautiful and decide to settle there, not returning to Europe. Over time, they take control of the center of the island. The Celts cannot fight the Germans, but they do not want the Germans on the island either. Over time, the Celts retreat to Scotland and Ireland because they are unable to fight. The ancestry of today's Scots and Irish comes from the Celts. The Angles, along with the Saxons and the Jutes, form England. England constitutes England. The Anglo-Saxon roots come from here, but don't think that all of today's English people are solely Anglo-Saxon. The main reason for the variety of different colors, redheads, blondes, and so on, is actually due to this. In the video, I will also discuss the attack of the Vikings. The Vikings will also infiltrate the English lineage, and the English will be completely in disarray. Now let's return to that period in Istanbul. In 537, Istanbul is the center of trade, with spices passing through here. Everything is very beautiful, and the enjoyment is at its peak. Justinian ascends to the throne in 527. He is a sharp and dynamic emperor, eager to strengthen the Roman Empire once again. This is attacking places like Italy and Africa. Moreover, it is also the one that had the Hagia Sophia built in just 5 years, from 532 to 537. It is beautiful, loved by Eastern Orthodox Christians, people coming from all over the world to see the Hagia Sophia. Justinian's fatherly laws produce a significant number of laws, not just the 12 tables. They are so fair that they are enforced throughout the entire empire. Let me tell you one of the laws. You will love the man. One of Justinian's 12 tables states that the seas and the coastline belong to the people. No one can buy or own that place. Anyone can enter the sea as they wish. Justinian's wife Theodora was one of the first ladies, meaning she was one of the first to be involved in the imperial administration. Think of it this way. During this period, it is not very safe to conduct trade caravans in Asian territories, but as long as you are in Roman lands, you pay the tax and are safe. The Roman emperor protects you. And we have arrived in France. How did France come to be? It has an incredible story. The Franks. The Frank Empire. They grow so much over time. This Frank Empire later transforms into what is now known as France. These Franks are actually Germanic. In the 4th century, they gradually arrive in Gaul. Then they conquer Gaul from the Goths and transform it into France, which is the foundation of modern-day France. In summary, the roots of the French are also Germanic. We now know this as well. They take some of the other small groups in Europe and establish a small empire called the Franks. But they are primarily achieving their growth by repelling the Huns. They stop the advance of the Huns in Europe. They push the Huns back and also drive the Romans downward. Suddenly, the Frank Empire emerges. While everyone is raving about the power of the Franks, they say, "Let our king be the one who stands up to the Huns and challenges Rome, Father." In this situation, all the barbarians living in Europe are connected to the Frank Empire. They have an emperor named Clovis, who is their king. What the man is doing is calling all those scattered, rebellious, rogue, and marauding scoundrels in Europe to come together under one empire. Now this is Clovis, the first Clovis, who is actually the first king of France if we go back far enough. But Clovis is turning another event around. Clovis's wife loves Christianity. After a while, Clovis also gets inspired. Clovis becomes a Christian as well. Now, they are transitioning from barbarism to the Kingdom of France, the Frank Kingdom, and the Frank Empire. At the same time, they are becoming Christians. One of the key figures igniting Christianity in Europe is also this. The French are actually also exciting Europe alongside Italy. Now we have arrived at Spain. We have briefly discussed France, so let's talk about Spain. The situation is different in Spain. The Visigoths flee from these Franks and settle in the western part of France, in Spanish territory. And the Christians, they are also Christians. Actually, the Visigoths are hanging out here. The Visigoth king dies in 710. Look now, this side is incredibly beautiful. Islam will come into play. With Tariq ibn Ziyad, the throne will be divided. There is a king's son named Rodrigo. He is thinking of a trick to ascend to the throne, saying, well, I will. This is Tariq ibn Ziyad and his army, the Islamic army, that advanced from way back. At that time, the Islamic army had already taken control of North Africa. In fact, the Rock of Gibraltar is later named after him, of course. The name Rock of Gibraltar comes from Tariq bin Ziyad. Tariq bin Ziyad and his army are waiting across the strait. He says, help them, they'll help, I'll ascend to the throne, then I'll send them away. Spain will be mine, the Visigoths will be mine. He is cunning. Tariq ibn Ziyad calls upon his troops. Tariq ibn Ziyad, expressing gratitude to heaven, crosses over with his army on ships. As soon as he crosses, he orders all the ships to be burned. This is where the phrase about burning the ships comes from. They say, Tariq, why are we doing this, teacher? Why are we burning the ships, esteemed commander? He says, there is no turning back. We will either hold our ground or die. With 7,000 soldiers, they are taking the land of the Visigoths. By the year 1609, Islam was already present in the Eider Peninsula, in this region. Bella will also be the one to bring him out, and there will be a lady named Isabella, along with her brother Edward. But that's also when Christopher Columbus will discover America, and that's still a ways off, so hold on. Tariq, or Tariq ibn Ziyad, had a tent set up on a mountain where he watched the ships passing through this strait. This mountain is called Jebel Tariq, or Tariq Mountain. Tariq ibn Ziyad names the strait after himself, the Strait of Tariq. This is the story of Tariq ibn Ziyad, who loves this region of Andalusia. To the Iberian Peninsula, they are building fountains and palaces. I have completely traveled around Spain. Andalusia is a magnificent place. In fact, a palace from there was even used in Game of Thrones. There are wonderful palaces, beautiful things, fountains, roads. It has brought along a magnificent culture. After Tariq ibn Ziyad, the Islamic army certainly does not stop. They say, we have taken this Iberian Peninsula. Next, the Frank Empire is on the agenda. They are setting their sights on the Frank Empire. After all, their backs are secure. The sea, the ocean, Africa is theirs too. It doesn't turn out that way. In 732, they engage in battle in a place called Tours, which is now part of France. The Battle of Poitiers is a tremendously significant event for Europe. The situation is enormous. The Islamic army is being defeated. They lose the Battle of Tuatia, which halts the advance of Islam in Europe. Here there is also a commander in the Islamic army known as Charles Martel, a magnificent man. Yes, it was Clovis who founded the Frank Empire for the Franks, but Charles Martel is an even greater father figure for them. Even greater than him is Charles Magnus, his grandson, Charles's grandson, who, the first Charlemagne. The person we call Charlemagne is actually the one who unites and elevates all of Europe, and he will be the grandson of that individual. This Charlemagne rapidly expands the Frank Empire. First he enters Cologne, then he takes the Alsace-Lorraine region, acquires Aquitaine, declares himself king of Genoa, and proclaims himself Prince of Bohemia. From there, he returns, taking Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Gelderland, and declares himself the king of Frankfurt and Munich. Thus, Charlemagne unites all these places under his rule as the king of many regions. Suddenly, Europe begins to unite in front of the Frank Emperor. This is a wonderful thing. In 800, he also appears before the Pope in Italy. The Pope says that from now on, you will declare me the Emperor of Rome. He is crowned with the Holy Crown and declares that he is the Emperor of Rome. I have restored Rome. Then Schalman turns around and also seizes the borders of present-day Germany. Therefore, the man who actually founded the first European Union is also Schalman. He united both the Frank King, that is France, and Germany. He even took Holland in the north. Where else could he take? He had taken the entire map of Europe. Turning back, he takes Austria as well, since that was the last remaining. All of Europe is now in the hands of Schalman. For the first time, someone is more powerful than the Pope in title. Now, not everything is going so well. Next are the Vikings. I will tell you everything I said I would. The situation in Europe is very complicated. All right, we have seen Spain, we have seen the Franks, we have seen Germany. They saw how badly Italy was established, but there is an unexpected event involving the Vikings. The Vikings are changing the fate of Europe. Just as the Germans plagued Rome, the Franks are expanding so much that they are now catching the attention of the Vikings. During that time, the Vikings are in the territories of present-day Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. They are stuck there, but it is more arable and warmer because the strange ones are freezing. They are constantly searching for more fertile lands. In this way, they want to gradually advance south and west. Their greatest advantage is their boats. The bottoms of their boats are flat, deep, and sharp like a blade, allowing them to sit squarely. They cannot enter shallow waters, but they flow into Europe from the Seine and Rhine rivers with their flat boats. The flat boats with dragon heads. It seems like they plunder everywhere they go. They are tearing things apart and advancing rapidly. Incredible raiders. Some settle in the places they go, while others go even further. During the time of Schalman, they do not pose many problems, because Schalman says that I have a large army managed from a single central location, just like the Roman emperor who does not care about the Germans. Schalman says that he has a great army and that he has devoured the Vikings. Unfortunately, after Schalman dies, things do not go that way. This north is pronounced as it used to be. Those from the north are divided into 3 parts of the land, which is distributed among the 3 heirs after Schalman's death. They immediately invade the west of France. The Vikings settle there. They call this land of the north Normandy. I will tell you about Normandy for a very different reason during World War II. They come once and settle there. Normandy is now for the Vikings. The Vikings do not stay here. They descend into the Mediterranean and advance into Spain. It is known that the Vikings discovered the American continent from the north in history. Various small remnants are found in different places. They even reached to southern Minnesota. The Vikings had already set foot on the American continent. In the 9th century, a man named Thorwald, the father of a Viking family, kills his neighbor during a fight. The Vikings do not take murder lightly in their society, and they exile the man. When he is driven from that land, he takes his son named Kuzililik and heads west, discovering what is now Iceland, where they settle. Iceland emerges in this way. Know every country, good or bad. When his son also stabs and kills a relative in Kuzililik, he is exiled as well, and he heads west and discovers Greenland. In fact, Greenland, the place called the Green Island, the Green Lands, is not green at all. It is ice, God's ice. But this is just a way to deceive people into thinking more of our clan will come, so I can die here all alone. That's why it is named Greenland. When it comes to Greenlands, people are drawn there and fall into a trap. The son of Kuzverik goes even further and sets foot in America, known as Vineland, where grapes are abundant, coming from the north. This refers to present-day Newfoundland. Thus, we now know how the Vikings discovered various places and how many there were. The Vikings are going crazy. The land of England is directly across from Normandy. They say, "We'll take England too, Dad." They also land in England. During their first incursion into England, they plunder churches and monasteries. They take the crosses from the churches. Holy books, gospels, and such are difficult to write during that time without manuscripts. They destroy them. They kidnap children and so on. The Vikings are very barbaric. The Vikings are referred to as Celts. They settle in Scotland and also in Ireland. Ships from Scandinavia bring the Vikings. Is the English lineage getting thoroughly mixed this time? Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Celts, Vikings. The English lineage is a soup. The largest of the 7 kingdoms is the Kingdom of Wessex. They even seized this in 886 with a massive army. This is something I previously made a video about on the roots of the English language. English is becoming a very complicated language. There is a part called Old Norse. It comes from the Franks. This is why English is such a complex language. The Pope awakens when Islam reaches Spain. He says that we must seize Jerusalem. They captured Jerusalem well. Jerusalem is important to three religions. For Jews, you can already see it on television today, for Christians as well, and for the Islamic religion. And he gathers the Crusader army. Everyone who joins the army says, I have forgiven your sins, and I have granted you a place in heaven. Let's go, starting the crusade. The crusade is a great war against Islam. The first crusade is from 1096 to 1099. The army is large, but a significant portion of it consists of peasants. They don't even have swords. A large group is going, the worst of whom do not understand why they are going, plundering the Christian villages they pass through. They believe there is wealth in Jerusalem and that sins will be forgiven. At that time, there is Sultan First Kilij Arslan in Anatolia, and the Anatolian Seljuk state exists, but they reach as far as Jerusalem. The Crusades are not going very well for us. There are many massacres happening in Anatolia. As a result, Jerusalem falls. They continue to dominate the region until the Edessa Empire in Urfa is taken in 1144. In 1147, this was referred to as the County of Urfa. It was called the County of Urfa in that period. When the Muslims capture the County of Urfa, help is requested from the German Empire. This leads to the Second Crusade. This time, they are experiencing great difficulties in Anatolia. The Anatolian Seljuk state is wearing them down significantly. A small army manages to reach Jerusalem. He is not very strong, of course. In fact, their intention is to unite with the kingdom in Jerusalem and also take control of Syria. They are unable to achieve this and are retreating. This situation is very beneficial for the Muslims, so they say they are not that strong after all. And Saladin emerges. In 1187, Jerusalem returns to Islam. It is taken from the Christians. This time, the Third Crusade is being organized against Saladin. I have previously told you about Saladin in history. 1189, a crusade is being organized. An army of 100,000 Germans and French enters Anatolia. They are all dispersing. After this dispersal, discussions about 5 and 6 take place 6 times. A crusade is organized, but they are never able to regain that power. The Pope is losing a lot of power. Europe is turning inward. They say enough. Instead of fighting at the Pope's command, let's focus on our own troubles. We are in hunger and famine. The 14th century, the 1300s, and the 1400s are a disgrace. Why? The plague emerges. Today, 3.4 million people have died from COVID. The plague caused 200 million deaths. Today, the world population is 7 billion, and nearly a quarter of the world population at that time is dying. Imagine that so many billions of people are gone. The plague sweeps through. At first, it appears again in the Chinese regions, in Central Asia. After leaving Central Asia, they reach the Black Sea. The Mongol army, which is said to be a cousin or descendant of Genghis Khan, besieges a Genoese fortress in Crimea. The Mongol army observes that the Genoese are not coming out of the fortress. They are catapulting their soldiers who died of the plague into the fortress. Those corpses, of course, spread the plague inside. As the Genoese board their ships and flee to Italy, the plague that devastates Europe and destroys its population spreads to Europe. The coronavirus has spread along the same path. As you know, it spread to Europe through Italy. At this time, England and France are at war. Even as Richard the Lionheart attempts to capture the castle, the French castle is falling. In 1337, King Edward III of England claims, "I have a right to the throne of France," and the war begins. They continue to fight until Istanbul is captured in 1453. They have been at war for more than 100 years. Actually, Henry V, the King of England, captures France for a time, but he stops when he marries the daughter of Charles VI, the French king. Charles says that when I die, since you will have married my daughter, you will also be the King of France. You are the great King of England, so forget about it, don't bother, just marry my daughter for now, and I will remain in power. The problem is that Henry dies before Charles. Thus, the English king dies without conquering France, poor man. Charles VI also dies 2 months later. To whom does the throne pass? To Charles's daughter, the 1-year-old Henry VI. What happens when the 1-year-old Henry VI cannot ascend to the throne? France descends into civil war. France begins to fight among itself. A power struggle for the throne begins within England. Both sides are without an emperor. You might remember it from Game of Thrones. The Wars of the Roses are beginning. Because there is a rose in the conflict between the two warring families. The name of the family is the Lancasters. The red rose represents the Lancasters, and the white rose represents the Yorks. The Yorks ascend to the throne, but Henry Tudor continues the war. Returning to Spain, after Islam was expelled from the region, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon remain. These two kingdoms are very powerful. They govern the region well. King Enrique of Castile tells his sister Isabella to marry the King of Aragon, so that they can seize his throne. Isabella truly falls in love with King Aragorn and elopes. Thus Isabella, who is normally expected to lead Castile, goes to join King Aragorn. Now, King Enrique of Castile's plan backfires completely because he dies 6 years later. This time, since Isabella goes to Aragon as a bride, the King of Castile joins Aragon. Aragon begins to govern all of Spain. And at that time, they hate Muslims so much that even in Granada, where there are still Muslims, they expel them as well. During that period, they also drive the Jews out of Europe to ensure that no one exists other than Christians. At that time, the Portuguese were very clever and felt cornered as the Spaniards had them under pressure. They quickly set sail for the sea and headed to South Africa. There, they rapidly collected gold and ivory and brought it back to Europe, finding their way through trade. At that time, an African king named Mansa Musa was so wealthy that, while traveling to Mecca for his pilgrimage, he built mosques and distributed gold in the lands he passed through. For 12 years, he diminished the value of gold in those regions. The story of another video, told in the context of African history. The Portuguese are facing a problem. It is difficult to cross Africa by land. There is a desert, and they are paying a lot of taxes. They are crossing the sea, which takes a bit of time. One of these Portuguese sailors, named Colombo, says that he will go to India to bring back spices. At that time, black pepper is very valuable. I mentioned it before. He says he will go west. Since the world is round, I will go to India from the west. At that time, America was not in between, so the maps show Asia here. If I go straight from this side, I should be in India, but it doesn't work that way. This ship is searching. When the ship cannot be found, it goes to Isabella, the Isabella who just took over Aragorn. He says to Isabella, "Isabella, if you could just give me a ship, I would go on a journey," or something like that. Isabella agrees to this and will provide 3 ships, but she can only do so 8 years later because she is at war with the Muslims in Granada. Nina is giving the Santa Maria. Colon sets sail, and they keep going until their food runs out. The crew will cut this short. He lands somewhere around Florida. This fool doesn't even realize that this is America. He thinks he has found India. He is coming back, and while he returns, America and Vespucci set out again and truly name this place America. I will tell you about this place in the history of America. The Pope is very powerful. In Italy in 1517, a person named Martin Luther goes and hammers a protest on the door of a church. He has a thesis of 95 articles and rebels against the selling of religion, the selling of land from paradise. This is a protest, and Protestantism emerges from here. During this period, the Renaissance begins. A rebellion starts. Painting and art become more uncensored and more powerful. Many European countries begin to rebel, asking, "Why should I obey the Pope who lives in Italy?" The King of England says in the 8th month, "I will take the Pope's place," and he is indeed correct. He has a church built for himself and converts to Protestantism. The Pope, of course, declares the Protestants to be godless. Instead of the 8th, the 9th Edward will take his place when he gets older. However, there is a bit of chaos. Edward is dying. From the kingdom of Aragon, he takes a bride from one of these Isabellas. From that bride, Henry has a daughter named Mary. There is also a girl named Elizabeth. The first Elizabeth is the first Queen of England, sir. Mary and Elizabeth are experiencing a struggle for the throne. Mary deposes Elizabeth from the throne. Elizabeth remains away from the throne for years and is imprisoned. Then, when Mary dies, Elizabeth ascends to the throne. When Queen Elizabeth I takes the throne, she does not marry. The clergy strongly desire her to marry, saying that she should marry so that our country has a king. She does not marry, but brings England into its golden age as queen. I have mentioned this in the history of England, and I will tell it again in the future. This is also the case with Elizabeth I's accession to the throne. Elizabeth is very fair, and she is loved by many. However, Mary is not well liked. Mary kills a lot of people, which is why she is called Bloody Mary. Now, there is a man named Philip, the husband of the deceased Mary. He is the heir to the Spanish throne. He has his eyes set on England. Does he declare war on Elizabeth I, claiming that England is rightfully mine because of Mary? On one hand, Mary was very Catholic. On the other hand, the Protestant Elizabeth is loved by the people. Philip says that he will conquer England, add it to Spain, and England will be Catholic again. At that time, Spain was very powerful and was planning to launch an invasion on England, but their ships were destroyed, and England became the country that ruled over Europe. The sun never sets on it. This is how the story of the emperor begins. You will also watch the video on English history. The next video will be about the history of America. We will unite the world and bring it from the First World War to the Second World War. I believe I am making good progress. I hope you are enjoying it. I am Haluk Tatar. See you in the next video.